Thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. So let me start with the basic ingredients or elements of an ecosystem. In the startup or entrepreneurship context, I would list four things as the primary ones: the market or the customer, which is the demand side; the product or solution, which is the supply side; the talent, which is required to build the product or solution; and the capital which enables it. So these four are the four major components. We can of course add the other things, including governance and regulation, because you do need an enabling regulatory system, both contractual, legal, financial, etc. But I think these four make up the main ingredients of any ecosystem, and more so in a startup.
Which group we would be fitting the people like angel investors, seed investors, and the probably the mentors and all.
So of course, the angel investors form the first point in a capital chain, I would say, because for many startups, they need risk capital, which basically means that you need to invest now, and then the returns come maybe a couple of years later, and perhaps you invest at a proof of concept level, while the proof of business value and proof of scale are not known, and hence the risk. In the risk capital ecosystem, typically you have seed investors and angel investors as the first points, who actually take the maximum risk actually. The next stage will be venture capital, and then it goes to PE, etc. So angel investors will come on the capital side. Now, the talent includes not only the talent within the company, but also the talent which supports the ecosystem in terms of its product evolution and the customer journey, what we often call product market fit. So the mentor system typically focuses on product market fit. They look at what the market wants, what the product service enables or offers, and whether there is a value. More importantly, if it is in a startup, whether there is a scale. There are lots of businesses which are very well run with profit and loss, but may not be a business which can be funded by risk capital, because a lifestyle business is general not funded by risk capital, because you need a non-linear return. So there's a fine difference between a P&L business versus you need a P&L, but there's a slight trajectory is a bit different.
Yeah. So I think in our economy needs all kind of businesses. Lifestyle businesses would form a major part of the economic activity. But the growth engine, I feel, will come from innovation and scalable startups and scalable models, which will be rapidly driven by technology. And I think the view you have given about the startup is quite interesting and very simplified way. You have made us understood what could be the components of a good ecosystem. I think Mrs. Hiranmay, who is the CEO of iHub, has a big list of questions. Before we move on to his questions, as you have said, the traditional businesses have scale, but they don't have the agility. But startups have the agility, but the scale is missing. So I think somewhere there is no chance for both these sectors or the things to collaborate. Before we move on to such discussion on open innovation and other things, I would invite Hiranmay and request him to throw his questions to Mr. Vijay.
Thank you, Nagarajan sir. Thank you, IVK, for joining us today. In fact, Nagarajan sir is driving a program in the state of Gujarat, and he's bringing in all people who have some interest in building ecosystems, irrespective of their backgrounds, maybe from academics, maybe from industry, maybe from successful entrepreneurs, investing groups, even civil society organizations. And one of the reason to having him and IVK here today, there are certain things in which we still need to kind of go to the next call. And I have certain questions, and I will ask to Vijay sir, and also some questions Nagarajan sir will take on. So IVK, one question which comes to my mind, because in Gujarat most of the startups that we have funded are early stage companies. So what do you think is a startup must need to ensure in the initial journey of 0 to 3 years to be successful or to stay alive to make some impact?
Yeah, I think it's a very pertinent question. And as we often say, that the most of the mistakes a startup commits is always in the first 18 or 24 months. And they're difficult to change afterwards. So I would say, let me start with the basics here, where when you start a company, you typically have more than one person, most of the time, maybe 2 to 3 people. In fact, if you ask me, it is good to have more than one person in a startup as a promoter. It is a long and a hard journey. So you do need, some company in that sense. It is not that the solo entrepreneurship is bad, but it is generally expected, especially if it is a tech-led startups. It is difficult to get all the skills in one person. So I would say, because it has more than one person, and I've seen many times or many instances so far, people do come together because they have been classmates, batchmates, relatives, acquaintances, etc. But when you start a venture, which is for profit, and especially take money from others, it is good to have a kind of an agreement on what we call founders agreement, and what are the rules of engagement. Because what happens is, when you start at a concept level, everybody is aligned, but you start diverging when you try to scale. How much money you take, how much you dilute, what kind of product you build, etc. So I would say a founders agreement will be a good way to capture what happens when you agree. How do you resolve a dispute? And if you have to leave in some way, or one of them has to leave, what are the rules for breaking it? It becomes very complicated if you take external money and then you try to redo these things. So I would say founders agreement as a first step from an understanding and kind of a playbook perspective. The second one I would say is classical thing, that many ideas, in fact all ideas are good. Few ideas are feasible, and only few of them actually have business value, and very few of them actually scale. So I think the earlier you find this answer, the better it is, because here time is money, right? The more time you spend, the more money gets spent. So I think it will be good to get a proof of concept faster, ideally with some kind of a customer feedback. Not that you just comply with the customer, but learn from what the customer or the market demands, and come to a product or a solution which has some proven business value. You may not have scale, and that is when maybe you want to raise money, because then the money is normally used, especially if you raise from investors, is to what you call bend the curve, right? That is for growth, not for an experiment alone. So I think the later stage you get, better it is. People generally rise in 1.5 years, which is okay. So I would say just watch the journey on how carefully or how diligently you find the business value, while the idea can be very creative. So that's my second point. The third one I see is that it's a slightly counterintuitive argument. The moment you start scaling, and you normally try to scale, or at least get the initial scale, I don't say big scale, initial scale, maybe after say second year as an example, most of the time the initial team may not have the skill set for getting that go to market and scale. So you should be willing and you should be open to take another person or persons to complement your skill sets. And in fact, one of the biggest issues I see in many of the startups is the difference between the promoters group and the next level group. And that friction or the convergence can make or break a company. I think these are the three major things I would say. There are a lot of other points in first 3 years. Get your books in order, make sure that you have your bookkeeping is right, etc. I mean, there are a lot of transactional stuff. But primarily, I would say the things which are very critical is to make sure that you have a founders or a people agreement, you know your business value, and you know how to increase your talent or complement. In fact, acknowledge that there is a gap. I think that's everything, right?
Wonderful. I think we see many of our startup doesn't look into a founders agreement. They think that everything is going fine and everything will go fine. And I think that's the mistake that many startups do actually. And then something happened between founders or even other members in the team, and that actually sabotages the entire game plan. So I think it's very interesting. By the way, through this conversation, I would like to say to all the viewers that Vijay is also co-author of a very famous book called Indian Startup Manual. It's available on Flipkart, Amazon, and sometime if he comes to Ahmedabad, you can get an autograph book from him. It's one of the finest book which has been written in the context of how Indian startups need to navigate things. Because there are many theories and books and tools available in the context of Western economies or other part of the globe. But this is the first book which is forwarded by none other than Chris Gopalakrishnan, co-founder of Infosys. Vijay and his team has put together the thoughts of how really a startup need to work. So I suggest all of you to go through that book and have an insight how Indian startup ecosystem has really gone to a level and what are the insights derived from them. So the question that Vijay, I want to ask to you now is, you have been the chief technology officer of Wipro. It's a huge organization, and I mean you're the tech guy to decide what this company, the group of company need to take a call about, right? So in that context, you might have driven innovation, new technology development, new market creation, all these things you might have laid in a conglomerate. Each of your decision or signature might be taking a huge call of billions. That's one part of the story. And now there are very, very less amount of people having a handsome paycheck like yours at that time, being the CTO of a large corporation and deciding to go and start again a startup, and which you have done in terms of Crayon Data. And then also raising more than $100 million for getting it to going to next stage or equal amount of resources. So how do you see innovation happening in large corporation like Wipro, where you have seen it closely, rather driven it closely, and how startups are innovating? Is there a correlation? Are they different? What is that called?
So in the corporate context, of course, I left Wipro at the end of 2011. So my view of Wipro will be a little dated, I would say, though I'm in touch with the current CTO, understand what they do. But I would say in a corporate scenario, it's good and bad. The good thing is that you have a good base of the business and customer base, technology base, and you also have a large amount of treasury, so you can afford to spend a lot of money. So that is a good part. The not so good part is that when you are large in your revenue and your brand, you protect what you already got rather than try to build something which may disrupt it. You know, it's just like wealth management for billionaires, right? Most of the money goes in managing the billions rather than growing it. So a lot of times it is about how to grow the business as usual, incrementally without disturbing too much of baseline. At the same time, experiment new stuff, as we are often told as CTOs, as Chief Innovation Officers, that your primary job is to ensure that we don't get surprises, right? So normally, if you take any CTO, I mean, Infi, TCS, most of them were my peers at the time. So we always have a classical approach that we support the current business or the run rate business, as they call, in terms of giving a technology freshness, in maybe projecting what skills to build, etc., and maybe incubate some of them. Second is also to ensure that we listen to customers' future areas and maybe invest upfront, because it is normally a customer-centric business. But all of them are related to the current business sectors you are in, current technologies you are in, and how you are trying to push the boundary. So that is one axis, a CTO always does. In fact, as my boss used to say at the time, you need to make sure that you're relevant. All right. So if you're running a $5 billion business, if there is nothing you do which has got anything to do with the $5 billion, then you have a problem. But there is another side of the business, which is what you call business not usual or business unfounded, where we take a bet. So we may take a bet on things which may not be related to the current business, but we try. It's called design of experiments or quantum innovation, whatever the name you give. In those bets, we work with academia, we work with new age companies, etc. When I was there in Wipro, the external ecosystem was just evolving. It was the external innovation, open innovation were not so popular as they are today. I was part of Berkeley Innovation Forum. I used to deal with MIT, dealt with Wharton, a lot of other companies, universities, but it was just emerging. Whereas today, I think it is almost mainstream. Almost every corporate has an engagement program with a startup. If you don't have one, you are in trouble actually. So that's what I would say in corporate. And sometimes, as we often say, if you have too much money, it's a problem to innovate, because you have too many options. Now, coming to the startup side, I think there is one difference. In startup side, you normally pick your problem very narrow or in deep, because you cannot play in a very large arena because that costs time and money. So startups will have a slightly different rhythm in that sense. And most startups will start with some kind of a view in mind or a vision in mind, and they try to disrupt it. The axis of collaboration between a corporate and a startup is generally viewed as go-to-market collaboration, where you take a startup solution and try to add value to the existing customer base, which is maybe non-core for the corporate, or maybe it is something which they have not done yet. So GTM collaboration is a very classical axis of corporate startup collaboration. There is another one. Some corporates do invest in startups, maybe to encourage in the initial areas. And if you are a horizontal technology company, we might actually even give you a platform for development. So that's how the corporate startups typically work. If I have to wear a startup hat and argue, I would say it is fantastic to get access to a customer. At the same time, we have to be very careful that someone doesn't hijack the agenda with which the startup is founded. Because normally what happens if you have a very large customer, they end up driving everything for you. So I think this is a balance one has to strike.
Wonderful. So I was just looking at the Facebook live feed this year session, and one professor is asking about mentorship. And I had also a question in my mind about mentorship. So I think many incubators and many enablers also feels that mentorship plays a very significant role, because access to capital is not that challenging today. What is your take on mentorship role for a startups? Can you illustrate an example where you may have got involved and seen mentorship playing a critical role? Or how do you find these mentors? Where are they? How do you locate them?
So mentors come under different flavors and personalities in that sense. So generally, mentorship is equated with mentorship in a function. So for example, I don't know how to get my financial model right or my pricing model right. I might take a help from a person who is a finance expert or a marketing or a sales expert, right? Similarly, I may need some help on writing an employee policy manual for a startup now that, say, you have grown big and you can't be so casual about how employees work in your place. So these are typically functional, functional help from an expert in that area. But where there is a need is typically the mentors who are I call them as full stack mentors. That means they have seen that business holistically. They know many things and they know how it works together. It is put together in a startup context. So we have a shortage of such mentors, because what happens if you take, for example, take a B2B solution, right? there is a slight difference, in fact, a significant difference in the way you sell a B2B product, the way you look at product market fit, the kind of IPs you generate, the kind of integration you need, the kind of talent you may need to have, etc., which is very different from a B2C product, which is maybe what you call consumer-led, advertising-led, social media-led. So the skill sets you need are very different. So in general, we assume that the full stack mentors, as we call, should have done that before, and they would have seen the whole cycle. It also involves looking at when to raise money and how much. Every time you raise money, you dilute. So you need to be careful on how many times you raise, how much to raise, and why do you raise, right? So to get a holistic mentorship, what I normally see, especially in some of the startups I know, there is one or two primary mentors for a startup because they get involved a little more deeper and not on a what you call episodic basis. And then there are a few others who come based on the phase or stage of a company, right? If you want to enter USA, for example, what kind of sales plan should you have? What kind of sales profile you should hire? That's a classical sales expertise, experience, which is very different from whether I should use AWS or Azure, right? Or should I use a native app development? So these are very different questions. So you typically find that there is one or two main mentors for a startup who get involved throughout, and then others come on a on and off basis. I should also say that in India, it is still at a very nascent stage. So I would take it as a city-based model. In Bangalore, perhaps we have a little more mentors because of the MNC mix we have. In certain sectors, maybe Gujarat is good. In certain sectors, Mumbai is good. So that's what I would say. But in general, if I have to make a comment on the ecosystem, yeah, mentorship is something which we're still not there yet.
Okay, wonderful. Meanwhile, I will take a question from the audience. So they are saying they got to know that you worked in a very decisive role in Wipro and worked with close people who made the IT industry in India as it is under the guidance of Mr. Premji and others. What do you think is a common factor of all these leaders? They make a lot of difference. I mean, work closely with people like Premji and others. What is that differentiator these people have who makes such a substantial contribution in our country?
I would say maybe 2 points. I mean, this can be a session by itself, but yes, I worked with many of the leaders of the IT industry. Many of them I know personally. I've also gone through the ranks in that sense. So I have seen them grow. I have seen the companies grow, and I have grown with them. 2 points which come to my mind. It's an impromptu question, so I have to give you an impromptu answer. One is leadership style. Many of them basically do not interfere in what you do, which is actually a great sign. They might own the company or they may actually founded the company, but they don't get in your way because they know that maybe you are the best person to make that decision. I think it's a great attribute, and that is perhaps a common trait you see across many of them. So which actually makes our life easier because then you do it on the merit of the case and not because somebody told you to do so. The second one is they're actually very humble and reachable, which is also a very good thing to do. So I would say, I mean, other than maybe some strategic directions or maybe some calls you need to take with respect to maybe geopolitical or such cases, generally they don't get involved at the operation level. Even at a strategy level, it is left to the business unit and mostly to the CXOs. I was a CXO. I ran a business before. I don't think ever anybody told me that you cannot do this because somebody doesn't like it, right? So I think the degree of freedom, and I would also say, especially in the Indian context, they're very strong on ethics. So you can sleep without worrying. It's a big thing when you do contracts across the world.
Wonderful. I think this is very powerful that ethical way of running Indian business and at that level when each of your decision makes a significant change. So all the participants who are listening to you, I think must take a note that you can still grow you can still make impact in the world, adhering to the rule of life, rule of the ethical protocols in the world, and that kind of leadership has made a significant differences. These are the kind of people to look up to, maybe. And
In fact, if I can add, there is actually a very popular statement for many CXOs. It is often quoted in the world as my boss or as the boss of a CXO, whether it is chairman or the president. You can always convert my yes into no because it's your call, but you cannot convert my no into a yes. If I say it is not worth it, you can't make it yes. But if I say it's worth it, you can still say no, I will not do it. That's okay. So it's a very what do you call a nuanced view of how things are run.
Wonderful, wonderful. So in this situation of present economic things going on in the world, and because of this virus and all, there are things going to change. I think the way entrepreneurs need to tackle this challenge has to be very agile. So, I mean, coming to this present context of the ecosystem, you have been also in the side of investment and seen this world. What is going on in investors' mind? Those who are having long power checks to ride. What is going on? Are they conserving cash or trying to sub the bargain? What's going on in their mind?
So I would say, to the best of my knowledge, the VC community, which are typically the next stage investors after the angel, and maybe the first institutional investors, they prefer to fund or help the current portfolio where they have already invested rather than doing new investments, because their first priority is to make sure that their portfolios work fine. So I would say that once I think they are currently busy with looking at their own portfolio where they have already invested, whether there is enough cash, etc. In fact, you would have read news that many of them also created some COVID-19 specific funds and for solving working capital and cash infusion kind of scenarios. From the angel investor perspective, you do see still the deals going on, people getting funded, but the difference is that almost all the plans are being rewritten now because we don't know when this will end. So a lot of projections have to be recast. In fact, even I would say even in my company and the companies I'm involved in, we have to redo the scenarios for this year and most probably next year. And the focus is on cash flow for this year.
Wonderful. I will come to Nagarajan sir for a quick question here, because he is the director for higher education and all universities and education comes under him. By the way, Nagarajan sir has been an institution builder throughout, particularly in the innovation entrepreneurship space. He built a idea lab in a village like scenario in a remote district of Gujarat when he was district development officer in his office itself. I mean, in Wipro, you might have a technology lab at your big building infrastructures. He designed an idea lab at his DDO's office, district development office, which is typically is not an office of innovation. It's an office to do regular things, right? And also, he also built a smart city incubator. It's India's first smart city incubator in Surat when he was CEO of Smart City. So, sir, सवाल ये है कि जब आप विजय टोल्ड अबाउट इकोसिस्टम पर्सपेक्टिव, जब आप ये इकोसिस्टम बना रहे थे साबरकंठा में एज ए डीडीओ और एज ए सीईओ ऑफ स्मार्ट सिटी, ये जो स्टेक होल्डर्स की बात हुई जो विजय ने बताया, हाउ डिड यू मेक एफर्ट्स और इनको इंटीग्रेट करके कैसे इकोसिस्टम बनाने की आपका आइडिया था और क्या कोशिश किए थे?
Yeah, I think last 5 years we have had tremendous changes. Because when I was first exposed to this growth engine and the exciting thing called startups and innovation 7 years ago, I felt why this is not happening in the places where I am posted. Typically in the beginning, earlier years of our career, we are posted in a very remote district and inside district. Then I thought why an innovation cannot happen. The problem I found was that there is a problem of discovery. for someone who comes to Ahmedabad, he comes with an expectation that he will be able to find say 10-20 startups or a few people whom we want to meet in Ahmedabad. But if he is going to go to a different place which is slightly interior, he is not going to, for one person he is not going to go. And the person who is living in a say a mid district or a remote district, why he is not able to innovate? Because he doesn't have the ecosystem, and he is not able to travel to a place like Ahmedabad, Rajkot or Surat, which have evolved as a hub. So there is a need, there was a need for connecting both these things, and there was a problem of discovery. The person innovator is not able to discover the ecosystem, and the ecosystem was not able to discover the innovator. And fortunately, the Student Startup and Innovation Policy has solved this problem by connecting our remotest of the institutions to a framework of innovation in the colleges. And then even a tribal student who is doing innovation in Ayurveda or in agriculture, his idea could find a place through our policy, and then he could be taken up the value chain into a incubator like I have, and then he can move on to the angel investment and then the entire hierarchy up to the private equity. Even now, we just had a question on how a startup can list in the BSE and NSE. So that is the kind of aspiration that people are having. So the connect of the pipeline from the base of the pyramid to the pinnacle of the startup and innovation ecosystem is now established. I think Gujarat is the only state, I am sure IVK will agree, that we have this grassroots to pinnacle, the pipeline and at least organic connectivity. And by aggregating it at the college and institutional level, what we are able to achieve is that we have a regular cadre of mentors. A professor who becomes a mentor is a mentor for life. Across the hundreds of students who passes through his hands every year, and probably say 10,000 students in his effective career, if he is able to even mentor and do some difference to 1,000 people, say 10% of the people who are passing through his hands, still at ecosystem level, the 500 people who are associated with our policy is going to make a difference, which is not happening in other states. So the more the time passes, I feel that the innovation and growth curve between Gujarat and the other states and the median of Indian startup story, the Gujarat is going to go higher. This is what I intuitively feel, because we have cracked the discovery problem, which I had felt it many years ago. So the problem of discovery is now solved. Now the problem is about bringing efficiency and patenting and IPR, and then commercializing where the biggest potential for value creation is there. So next our focus should be on technology commercialization and then latching it on to the risk capital ecosystem, which IVK has been mentioning so far.
Wonderful, sir. So listening to you and IVK, the question comes to my mind. You have worked on public policy, Vijay has worked on technology policy, and both had some kind of impact on, he might have designed strategy and policy for the company like Wipro, and then now working with a startup. So how is the role of policymaker? So I will first come to Nagarajan sir to hear from him. What is the role of a policymaker or role of public policy per se to drive ecosystem or design ecosystem? And then I will come back to Vijay in terms of looking at how private sectors can also initiate those things.
Yeah, I think we should start with the maxim that our Prime Minister often said, that minimum government and maximum governance. So if you set the policy, you set the boundary, you set the arena, you set the incentives and disincentives in the ecosystem, and then leave it to the ecosystem to play according to those rules and provide a equal playing field for everyone. And then not equal, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of equity of access, equity of to resources, and equity of opportunities. That is where his public policy is coming in, setting the environment and then leaving it to the players So it is more like, setting the rules of the game and then a little bit of refereeing, but never actually meddling in what the players are doing. I think that is the kind of way public policies should function, and a lot of our policies are designed like that. And if you see the way iHub is operating as an independent entity is another example of innovation enabled by the government, but not directly influenced or misinfluenced by government. I think that is a balance that we have to achieve in all spheres, especially in startup and innovation.
So I think a very interesting point that you mentioned about a public system being at arm's length, but having ownership in the game. So you own it as a country, own it as a state, own it as a system, but also be in a facilitator mode rather than in a controlling mode. So I think that's very beautifully articulated. So IVK, now I comes to you. How do you see the policies driving this ecosystem?
So as it is often the debate on what is the role of market versus what is the role of state, right? So in entrepreneurship model, given the current technology trends, the focus of the state is typically about allowing capital flows, which is inflow and outflow, and second, ensuring certain demand, especially the initial demand. So as a member of the National Startup Council, I mean, this is what we actually work on what are those enablers, which are needed. So for example, I think we solved the risk capital part in the early stages now. We also have enough people or startups thinking about starting one or growing one. So as a social mindset is changed. But we also found that when it comes to getting an initial customer or initial contract, we end up going to some of the global giants rather than local companies. So the policy enablement is typically to ensure that the procurement policies support startups, which is what you see today in many of the policies, which is good part. The other one is from an investor perspective on capital flows. The easier the capital can come in and go out, of course, with some conditions, is an enabling thing for an ecosystem. There is a third element, I would say, which we are yet to close in detail, is the closing of the loop in manufacturing. See, a lot of times, unless you do pure software, any other thing needs manufacturing, either in electronics or in metal, which is the loop which normally goes out for complex systems. So I think the logistics and enablement of export-import in those things make a big difference. Just to give an example, the current solutions which are there for COVID-19, most of them depend on components from outside. Sometimes very simple components like infrared sensors. It's just unusual that we don't have them here, or we don't make them here, or we don't make them in scale. So I think those are the things one can create into a cluster and perhaps grow the innovation much more. We have to pick an arena and a theme, and we can then close the loop. That's what all people across the world do.
Wonderful. So I think you raised the right point that either you give money to an entrepreneur or create markets for him. So typically many ecosystems in the world have created the model of funding startups, like the VC industry or the private equity industry. They pump money so that you go build things in post. The other model that we're talking about is you create markets for them. So once you have a product, you procure from them, you buy from them. Rather than going into giants of corporations, you buy from startups. And I must say here, Nagarajan sir is around. I remember when 3 startups came to me 3 years before, they wanted to do something in solid waste management. And at that time, Nagarajan sir was at the helm of CEO of Smart City Surat. So the guys came to me. The guy's name was Nisank Shah, who was an alumni from Entrepreneurship Development Institute, Ahmedabad. He has a decent amount of product validation and attraction. And he came to me asking, can I get 10 lakhs rupees, right? And then I asked him, why you need this 10 lakhs? He says that, sir, grow karna hai, I need to expand. Then I asked him whether you need this 10 lakh or you need a 10 lakhs work order from somebody who can use your solutions. Then he says, sir, work order milega to acha hoga, because then I get money and also validate my technology. And immediately I asked him, why don't you go and meet the Smart City Surat CEO? At that time, Nagarjun sir was the CEO. He went there, and many often hear this interesting point, because you raise these public procurement policy things. He went there, he met Nagarjun sir, his subordinates. Initially, there were some hiccups, for sure, because in Indian aerial system, we don't have a very easy facilitation for procuring directly from the startup. Despite that the intent is good, despite that this is a young guy trying to do something, you don't have free hands. You don't have an easy hand to go and just pick and get it in government. But then some innovation Nagarjun sir and his team did to pilot him in a specific area of the city. They allowed him to manage there. And once they did the pilot, and then he got an order from Surat Municipal Corporation. And then once this pilot was done, then he got an order, and then he got into different municipalities. Now it's a 35 people company. And one day this boy who started this company came to my office and he says, sir, I got a new car, and this is the money that I got from the profit of the first contract that I got with all municipalities of the state. Now, this is very interesting, and Nagarjun sir would like to highlight how public procurement, is it open to mandate to give contract to these kind of startups, or is there a limit that hinders it, or how do he manage to facilitate such kind of startups when he was at the chair?
Yeah, I think we all should have some space for experimentation. So if you want to introduce a new idea or try out something, it's better to introduce it in a very lower scale or a small scale, just to do as a proof of concept. But one good thing about government pilot is that it adds a lot of credibility to the startup. It may not be in terms of turnover, it may not be in terms of money, but in terms of credibility and in terms of acceptability and trust, I think it adds a big value to the startup. And once you have a single pilot in government, it's easy to get the next one. It's more easier to get the third one. So it depends. Ultimately, it's something where you have to crack. You need to do the advocacy. You need to do a little bit of persuading and find a gap where you will find some inside champion. I've found that many times having an inside champion who believes in your idea, who wants to help you within the framework of law, is really very, very helpful, and it helps in adapting the product also, especially in things like solid waste management and other things where I have first-hand experience in municipal services. But at a macro level, whatever the government has done so far in terms of giving exemption for startups from the earnest money deposit, and the best innovation I would say is the government e-market, which is called the GEM portal. The government e-market is a very anonymous type of procurement where you don't have any sort of interaction, negotiation, discretion with the vendor, and the products are highly standardized. And if you want to compete on the given standard on a price point, it is very much possible in GEM. And a lot of startups are doing it. So you don't need a connect, you don't need an introduction, you don't need a sort of network to actually land something in government, but you can compete in an open and transparent terms. I think that has revolutionized the procurement. Though there is another challenge. The startups also I have seen many times, they look at government as somebody who is going to come and just give you something just because they are government. No, he is also a very critical, very, very choosy, and very nitpicking sort of a customer. So you need to, if you want to address that market, you need to address that pain point. So I think a lot of startups are doing well. Those who have cracked this formula of being working with the government system, they have done really good. I have seen startups who are in the identification of houses through RFID tags in the urban sector. So the first one word is your hardest part. The rest is all just getting a smaller. So start small, prove your product, then upscale. Have a 3-year, 5-year framework for government, because once you establish as a credible player, you have more repeated advantage. So government is a different kind of customer, but not a bad customer, I would say. So it depends on the startup who wants to do. Nothing is easy, and even being an entrepreneur is not easy. So I think everyone should try their hand in being a good vendor to the government, and certainly doors will open. I am very positive.
Wonderful. IVK, any comments from you?
So as a rule of thumb, if somebody gives you 1 crore to your company and that 1 crore comes from an investor, you typically dilute about 20%. If that 1 crore comes from a customer, your valuation is up by 5 crores.
So it's
normally on a 5x multiple. Yeah, assuming it's 5x multiple. So it's always good to choose a customer money, and it actually helps raising money from the investor and not the other way.
It's fantastic. So I think it was very fundamental that you also got clear that one hand you actually reduce 5x, one hand you multiply 5x. So this is one of the interesting things that we are also doing. At this outset, I must say there are initiatives at central government level like Agni project by the team of advisor to Prime Minister's Scientific Office. They have now selected 100 startups who are product market fit, and now they have written to us, written to Nagarajan sir and iHub to help them to pilot. They are also giving money to pilot, and if the pilot succeed, the contracts will follow. So this is a very interesting experiment that we are doing. The second thing that we are doing in this segment is we have 2 dedicated interventions at iHub and Government of Gujarat level. One is called Startup Grow, in which we are going to take help of our field officers and different secretaries and directors of Government of Gujarat, in which we will facilitate, iHub will facilitate for product market fit startups to pilot. So that's Startup Grow. And once you pilot and validate, the next project start, the next program start, we call it a Startup Mart. So it's like a mart for ready-to-use solutions. And these are 2 ambitious projects of Government of Gujarat, particularly for iHub. In the Startup Mart, our idea is once you have the pilot, you have an interface now. It's both B2B, B2C or B2G, both private sector and public sector in a very curated manner, in which your feedbacks are assembled, in which the recommendations are assembled, and it's being done in a public platform. So it adds a lot of credibility per se. And one of the single intention of doing these 2 programs at iHub is to ensure that the time taken or the runway between your pilot and runway between your pilot to scale, how certain it would be. Because many often, particularly the venture capital backed companies or companies who have taken private money, if the runway is too long, then the value capture become very, very suboptimal. They don't capture big value in that part of the value chain, because ultimately all startups work in the global funding life cycle. In 8 to 10 years, they need to return the money. And if they take more time to do pilot, if they take more time to capture value, definitely they're going to be suboptimal. So these are 2 initiatives that we have taken. So IVK, have you mentored any startup? I remember you referring one startup in educational technology domain earlier, and we helped them to also got little access to Government of Gujarat that time. Have you come across any startup which you have mentored and tried to do something with B2G or in public systems? And what kind of challenges, opportunity you saw there?
So I have done one which I actually introduced them to you, because they essentially work in the education segment and maybe more connected to the government, schools and students, etc. I have done one more on the vocational training side, but it's some time ago. Those are the 2 on the education domain. I'm currently mentoring a few in the IoT side, legal analytics, media analytics, and IoT side. I don't mentor too many because the ones I mentor, I'm deeply involved, so I can't do too many. But yes, but as a member of both the Indian Angel Network, National Council, and a lot of other forums, I do see a lot of traffic in startups, and I understand, But yeah, in the context of Gujarat, because I'm involved with IIT Gandhinagar, Gujarat Venture Finance, and a lot of other ventures there, so I'm familiar with the startups in Gujarat in that sense. Yeah.
Wonderful. Nagarajan sir, there is a question from Dr. Nandini Kannan to you, what kind of academic environment can nurture greater creativity among students in universities? Because you are at the helm of education department, at least higher education as a director. What's that is your take?
Yeah, I think a very open communication and very positive, supportive communication from the teachers with the students, bonding would certainly help. And institutional framework like the student startup and innovation policy is going to facilitate the innovation in the academic environment. Like these kind of webinars we are doing is also one of the ways to the light up the minds of the change makers, enablers, and also the students. And going by the comments, a lot of people are attuned to log into Facebook Live or Zoom at 4 o'clock every day. Almost every day we are doing this since last 50 days. So I think anything that crosses in Hindu mythology, it's said that if you do anything for 40 days, it becomes your habit. We have already crossed that 40 days, and it has sort of become a very good habit. And this will actually provide an incentive, a free mind, a boldness, a courage for the student to think big. So the student can think that I too can become an innovator, and we will facilitate that. So creativity, and when the creativity and idea comes, it should be tried out. So we provide that opportunity in the colleges, and we have so many enlightened teachers who are looking at student as a positive energy to be molded. I think that is already creating a lot of impact in the environment of the academic institutions in Gujarat.
Wonderful. IVK, one question, I don't know what exact answer he will give. So one entrepreneur says that many often people aspire to be a good leader in corporates. And if you are any CXO like CTO, CEO, CHO or something, you think your life is done and you, wow moment. And you decided to leave that and start a new startup at that age after being the CTO of Wipro. How easy it is, or how do you come out of that inertia of being successful at that table and again remain a beginner again? What is that philosophy? What is that philosophy? How do you really take a decision of that?
Yeah, interesting question, but I often get this. We often call Crayon as a middle-aged startup because my co-founders are also, actually they're a little elder to me. We're all in the wrong side of 50. But I would say that even when I was in Wipro, I was always more a bit tech-minded or new area-minded. So I have worked with new areas, I think, all through my life. Whether it is called a startup or a corporate structure is a matter of entity design, but not domain. When I joined Wipro, I think I'm the first or second person for telecom, which Wipro did not have. Later, I created IP telephony and started many other programs on cloud computing, etc. So I think at every point of time, I was interested in things which are new, complex, and uncertain. So that way, I think even before I became CTO, while I ran a business for wireless before, prior to that, I was the chief technologist for all the telecom area, which is also about exploring new areas. I worked from 2G to, up to maybe 3G PPR6 to be precise. So I think that stayed with me. And even in Wipro, I think we had kind of a venturing mindset. Initially with internal innovation, and then later it started with working with startups. So for me, the transition was not as dramatic as what you would expect if I were to run a classical resource-led scaling business. So I would say I'm a little atypical in that sense. But I have to say that moving from a corporate to a startup environment is a significant change in terms of your lifestyle, your habits, and etc. While I was used to it, even then, see, when you are a CTO of a large company, nobody will put a phone down on you, right? Whereas in a startup, you have a hard time getting somebody on the line. So I think a lot of times you get humbled when you come into the market, right? My title has no value, right? I'm just nobody when you're in a startup, right? You have to start all over again. And I think one of the challenges I see with many people who come from corporate to startup, let me tell you that most of them fail, okay? The reason being, you can't apply the corporate principles in a startup, right? And if you are normally a manager, then you manage the resources below and the management above, which most of the time in a startup doesn't exist at all. So I think it's actually, I would say, rewiring yourself and getting grounded, right?
Wonderful.
And otherwise, it becomes a long, exercise for many people. Some people did very well. Some people, suffer a lot, and some people will be somewhere in between. I think the biggest difference, I would say, as you rightly, the question is rightly asked, it is all about change of your lifestyle as well, right? So you stay in a different class of hotel and a different class you fly when you're in corporate. When you're a startup, you don't, right? Because it's your money and your investors' money. I can't just show lifestyle in that sense. So I think it's a big humbling experience for many people. So if you're not used to it, it's not the cup of tea for everyone.
So I think what you are clearly spelling between the words is being entrepreneurial is the main thing. Whether you use it for a corporation at the lead role or whether you use it for your own startup, these are two different phenomenon. But the core of this thing is, as an attribute of a human being, is being entrepreneurial. Because when I see people like Nagarajan sir in public system, they are no less an entrepreneur for themselves. I mean, whatever the boundary condition they have as a public servant, many often, I mean, it's not an easy 10 to 5 job. You also try to innovate within those constraints and try to build institutions and systems. So I think what you were saying rightly is being entrepreneurial is more important. And then whenever you get an opportunity to convert that spirit into an adventurous thing in your life, I think that's the point. And I think many often that even in our policy and all these things, many times we get busy in giving money, managing their accounts and reporting. We forget to figure out how to find those people who are entrepreneurial in nature and listen to them. I think that's what is the core essence of our driving game in the government, that all these other things can be secondary, but finding people who are entrepreneurial in nature, finding people who are risk taking in nature, it's something very crucial to start with. So one question, Vijay sir, is to you is little bit about your book, a very famous book, the Startup Manual, Indian Startup Manual. How it happened, and any specific thing that you like to draw from that book to share to our audience?
Well, it was not supposed to be a book in the first place. I was leading a task force under National Startup Council of CII, led by Chris Gopalakrishnan, and I was responsible for the content creation for the startups in the age of 0 to 3 years, right? And we divided 3 to 5, 5 to 8, like that. And we gave a set of recommendations, my team, and it was some 4-page report kind of thing. And we said we should build some templates which people can use so that they can use them in a startup journey, and we also tell them when to use them. Then Chris suggested that, why do you give a recommendation to write a template? Why don't you write one, right? Why don't you actually finish it? So I should say that I grossly underestimated the effort, and then it took some time, about almost a year, to complete it. And I think except for Professor Sadagopan, everyone else is a new author, and we may asked Penguin to publish it, and we thought we'll sell a few. We sold about 8,000 copies.
Wonderful.
And it is so much that when I went to Bhutan with Piyush Goyal, Minister, I had to send about 60 to 70 copies to Bhutan. Because they want to,
are trying to learn Indian startup ecosystem.
Yeah, they want to write a manual for Bhutan based on this, actually. So then I have now made some additions to the book for the second edition. Added a few things like data privacy, then harassment at workplaces, product management, based on the feedback I received. Of course, right now it is stuck with the printer in Delhi, so it is not released yet. The ebook we are working on to release first. But one feedback I got is that whether we can get that book in, it's in English, I can only write in English. But whether we can get that book in Hindi or any other language.
Even Gujarati per se.
Yeah, I mean, so I thought let the English version come out and then we can figure out a local language version, because many people told me, in fact, it was surprising to me because the contracts are in English, right? So why do you need a book in Gujarati or Hindi if you are going to write it in English? So somebody said, no, it is not for writing, it's for understanding. I will understand in my local language, I'll get somebody to do the contract in English, which I thought is maybe a valid reason to do it in another language. So yeah, that's where we are. But it's a great experience.
The first version of the book got released, I think, last year.
The first edition was released about 2.5 years ago. And we have both the ebook version and the print version, which is available, of course, on the site and etc. The second edition, well, I should have launched it in April, but for the current pandemic. So yeah, that's where we are.
I mean, becoming an author is anyhow a proud thing. Becoming a celebrated author is also the proudest one to say. And there is a proverb, people say that each of us die without spelling 3 or 4 books staying inside us. हम मर जाते हैं, हमने ज्ञान को अपने अंदर रख के लिखते नहीं कभी. And Nagarjun sir inspires me daily, day in, day out, that, you know, all the ज्ञान that we are giving, it should be codified. Otherwise, there is no purpose, because all the knowledge that you accumulate after decades of learning, it must go. See, there are 2 ways. One is the academic writing, right? So professors writing books who doesn't have access to a real world, and there are people like you who have real world access, but they don't write. So that's how the learning become incomplete, or at least semi-complete. So, Nagarjun sir, any comment on codifying this success story? Any take on yours?
Yeah, one thing I found about the book, you know, I just had a cursory look somewhere, and now after this discussion, I think I should read it quickly. It was very simplified by. It was not typically a book. The impression I have now, it was not typically a book. It was actually a template that you could just modify and start with you know, some thought process in your own brain. So in that way, I think the book is more a workbook for a startup. So it's not a book to give jnana or ideas, but it's something which is pushing you or nudging you towards an action. So that way, I think it is filling a very critical gap in the startup knowledge ecosystem. And I'm sure that I think we should have an offline discussion about making it available in Gujarati soon.
Absolutely. In fact, what I believe is there are 3 kinds of books available in the ecosystem. One is the rag to riches kind of thing. I was a poor boy, I did this, I became a rich boy, all right? Okay, so that's one narration of the book. And the second are the books who gives you GAN. They give you theories about how to make lean startup, how to make this, that. But what I liked about this book, which Vijay has written, and almost all student innovators who want to build companies must read his book. It's a 2-night book kind of thing. I remember 200 pages or something, but it tells you about what are the things a startup need to rectify in Indian context. Because there are certain theories who are good in Western context. There are certain theories who are good in European context. But there are contexts that you need to contextualize in Indian context. Vijay, would you like to highlight certain key differences which you think need to be contextualized in Indian context if startup need to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, some quick points. One is about how do you register and where do you register the company? Or is it a company or LLP, right? So I think the entity decision is very important, right? Many people try to convert LLP to private limited, then or register in India and then change it to some other country. So there are ramifications if you do that. It is not that you cannot do, but it is better done in a proper way, in a right sequence. I would say entity side is one difference. Second is, as I said, a founders agreement will be good. And the third one I would say on raising money, especially in India. We are very casual with money in the sense that we take a lot of hand loans and any informal way. Now, when people take money initially, they will just pull up some 20-30 lakhs, form a company, and it's all there. And then when they want to raise money, somebody will look at your books and say, okay, where is this 10 lakhs coming from? You say, oh, it came from my family. It came from my friend. But what is it? Is it a loan? Is it a grant? Is it an equity? What is it? So they cannot explain them, or they assume that it is given to them. And in many instances, when I have done diligence for some of the investments for the angel networks, it was to my utter shock that the person who gave the money doesn't necessarily agree with what the promoter is saying. They used to ask me, what is the valuation of the company? If the valuation is 5 crores, he will say, okay, that's equity then. So we used to find that the way you treat money on your books, especially if you borrowed money from somewhere, it is very critical to keep a record and also understanding of what that money is. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult later for the investors to even figure out what this money on the books is. So I would say that is one unique thing in India, because we're a bit informal and casual when it comes to the initial stages of taking money. The other one which is often asked is, should I register a company in India or outside? Now, this is in fact, in my book, there is one case where it's the other way around. The person wants to register in India and not outside. The general view is, if you take money from venture capital, 95% of venture capital in the world comes from one country. So better register outside, in US or Singapore somewhere. So, but you want to sell to Indian government, you want to support Indian customers, etc. The capital flow becomes very complicated. So I think it is based on where your customers are, where the capital is being raised from, what your scale model is. So I think those are things to keep in mind. And last point is, if you really have something to differentiate, make sure that you file a patent or protect your intellectual property, whether it is trademark or copyright or IP or patent. We are a bit casual about it. Maybe a little formalism will help. That's what I do. And I think Indian mindset, if I have to compare with a US, a Europe company, for us, everything is an opportunity. So in fact, the role of a mentor in many startups is to make sure that they stay course and not go all over the place.
I think that's very important. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree. I have seen personal example of your first point, which is about what type of company to incorporate. And even in 2 cases, I had given an advice to go for a properly established company, but they did not agree. One went for enterprise sole proprietorship, and within 1 year they had to look at some other option. And the other person they made it a partnership, and now later on they faced a difficulty in converting it into a private limited. So I said, if you are serious about your business, go for the most formal, they said compliance and other things. I said, what is the problem in being compliant? That is how you will grow. That is going to give you the clear legal base to grow well. So I think that is something I have also experienced in my little bit of discussion with the entrepreneurs. That is something we really need to take care of.
Wonderful. IVK, I have a question. Somebody texted me on WhatsApp who is watching on Facebook Live. He says China is a $4 trillion manufacturing economy. US is a $2.3 trillion economy in manufacturing. Asia as a whole is very, very, apart from China, it is too small. India is hardly $400 billion. So now, predominantly, and that comes to the point, and this is what Nandan Nilekani says, that India still has to bank up on its service sector. That's going to give a growth high, not the manufacturing based thing. So having seen that domain, understanding that it is the service sector which is going to drive the engine for at least a decade, during this COVID, during this crisis, during such situation, how do you think the service sector is going to be affected, which actually caters most of our engine to drive? And what are the things our startups who are into service domain need to take care of?
Yeah, so I think on the service sector, since most of the service sector leverages technology, the disruption is not so much in that sense that you can deliver it still online or work from home. The problem seems to be in closing deals, especially if you're in consulting, because you cannot travel, though there are some deals being done on the phone or on the video or e-documentation. Second one is you cannot visit many of the sites for implementation. Unless you are working only on a cloud-based SaaS platform, many other software solutions need integration and implementation at the site. Sensor networks, for example. So there is an impact in that sense. I would say about 20 to 30% impact is there. As the world opens up, maybe those restrictions go away, but I still think that because for the next 18 to 24 months, many of them are in the conservancy mode or resilient mode, the scope reduction is expected. So people only do those projects which are very core and critical and not spend on the discretionary projects. So if your consulting or a service sector work is in the discretionary budget, most probably it will be ramped down or substituted with a local vendor. Because we do serve a lot of companies outside of India, but if they choose a local partner and not you because you are remotely placed, that may be an impact. I think these are some of the things to keep in mind, right? I would also say that the other way, that to help companies survive this, you allow some kind of a scope creep, even if it is beyond your scope of work. If you can solve a customer's problem, it gives you cash, it gives you stickiness with the customer.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I think on this point, Hiranma, I would like to say again,
Please.
when we had another webinar in where the startup said, now what is the adaptive steps we should take during COVID? The stickiness about customer was discussed. So the final point emerged that if you are able to make money, please do. If you are not able to make money, but if you can make a customer, please do. If you can both do it, both of them, then well and good. So we were talking about pivot and what kind of pivot startup should take. So these two things emerged. I think the customer stickiness is something related to that.
There is a joke in entrepreneurship community. Actually, it's a guideline. Never stand in the line of cash. And all ideological filters are off during this time.
Sorry, could you repeat it again?
The ideological filters should be off. Do anything which gets you cash into the company, right?
Wonderful.
And never stand in the line of cash.
Wonderful. One participant of your session on the Facebook, Mitsu Acharya from Bhavnagar University, is asking, what are the kind of role the modern day entrepreneurs in India need to play in the Atmanirbhar Bharat?
That is to me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I would like to make one fine distinction that we often associate innovation with those companies which raised risk capital.
Oh.
Okay. Actually, innovation is not related to risk capital alone. I mean, there are many MSMEs who run a profitable business, may not raise any risk capital, manage their working capital well, and still innovate. So there is no problem with that. So we should never associate that only those companies who are VC funded are innovative. They get featured very often in the media, that's all. Okay. Yeah. The second thing is risk and knowledge are not related.
Oh.
Just, in fact, it's the other way. If you are very knowledgeable, you may not take any risk at all.
Wonderful.
So sometimes a bit of ignorance is good.
A bit of ignorance is good, yeah.
Yeah. So entrepreneurship is about taking risk, not being knowledgeable.
Wonderful. I think this will be the quote of the day. Entrepreneurship is not about being knowledgeable, it's about taking risk. Nagarajan sir, any comment?
I think we have enough things to munch upon in the evening today, thinking about all the good thoughts that IVK has thrown to us today. And I would encourage everyone to, go through the startup manual. And I think we should borrow some ideas and start, spreading it to our students so that they are having a easy, start to their entrepreneurial journey.
I will answer that question on Atmanirbhar.
Please.
So my view is there is a debate on the supply chain movement expected from China to India because we are perhaps the only country which will match in scale, if not same, at least somewhat. I would say that in certain sectors, maybe it is possible, but in the high-tech sector, especially electronics, I think we are far away from that. So in certain components, yes, but I think we still do not have the same level. It will happen over a period of time, not immediately. So I would say that because the Chinese ecosystem on manufacturing, on electronics, especially complex one. So if you take the world in electronics alone, the passive components, most of them come from China. Displays come from Korea and Taiwan. Processors come from actually even US, the complex ones. So I think it is a complicated supply chain. To replicate it very quickly in India, it takes time, especially when we don't have any chip making ability here. However, in some other sectors, I think it is possible. So I would look at sector-wise analysis rather than a generic answer on whether we can do or what needs to be done.
Wonderful. So to just sum up, I had promised IVK that I will run a quiz based on his talk today on building ecosystem sometime sooner. For the talk, and the best people who perform in the quiz will get autographed book of IVK when this pandemic is over. He has gifted me a pack of books, actually autographed himself when he visited last time, and I went through that book, and all the people who went through that book found it very, very useful. And to come to the conclusion, IVK sir, I think you have seen closely the Gujarat ecosystem in last couple of years. You visited innovators, met them last year, and also you sit in the investment committee of Gujarat Venture Finance Limited. As I know, you have been interacting with startups, investors, and all. So, to the last part of this dialogue, you have been a part of Singapore ecosystem, you have been a part of Chinese ecosystem, you've been part of American startup ecosystem, and obviously you are based out of Bangalore ecosystem. And you now see Gujarat ecosystem. What are the things that we're doing right? What are the things that probably we have done a little bit wrong? And how do we move ahead from here?
I would say that the entrepreneurship is, I think, in the blood of a Gujarati. So I don't think we need to, help in that mindset perspective. Whereas I know that in some states they have a service mindset. So that way Gujarat has an advantage of actually starting a business from a mindset perspective. I would say that Gujarat is very well placed when it comes to cross-domain or cross-sector synergies, especially Ahmedabad, for example. So I think leveraging that will be useful because most of the new products and solutions will be for Indian market. So it needs Indian design ethos. It needs Indian manufacturing. It needs Indian design or a IP element. So I think that is one area maybe one can collaborate a little more. I know that generally these faculties and disciplines don't collaborate unless there is an external environment and context. Maybe now we have it. Perhaps that can be brought in both from a regulation policy perspective and from capital perspective. I feel that will be a good one to do. The second one is the Gujarat has been very open-minded in that sense that they invite a lot of people like me, so I think inroads into other ecosystems you already have. I was involved in I think the first meeting of the iHub, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So I think if we have a forum where we get different levels of different kinds of people and sectors, and we can make it a little more systematic in that sense, then we can solve the second stage of the problem I was referring. We have a good capture of the base funnel. Let's make sure that the middle funnel we can nurture better so that they can grow well and also go deeper. I think in pharma and in jewelry, in oil, etc., you have a local ecosystem. So the demand loop can be closed even internally or within the state. So which is actually very good. So maybe those are things one can look at.